You've said before that the human body has the genetic potential to live to be 200 years old. What's robbing us of the last 120 years?
Humans have hubris. We think we have all the answers. Hubris has solved many problems, but this business of us dying so young, so early in what is our genetic potential, that's hubris because we haven't figured it out yet. Now, there's genetic programming and reprogramming cells, and we're pouring billions of dollars into that. But that is the first thing that I think is stolen, the 120 years that we are owed. The second thing, the second thief, if you would, is ignorance. Not that humans are ignorant, we just don't pay attention, we don't listen. So, for example, in biology, birds with a silly bird brain can figure out how to travel 3,000 miles to get to their nesting spot on time, or it's the end of the species.
Yeah.
They just have one small protein in their eye that is hit by sunlight that gives them a photon of energy to tell them exactly where to go. Our solution, our hubris, means that for us to figure out where we're going to go is we're going to map the entire planet, okay?
Yeah.
And then we shoot rockets into the air with satellites so we can upload all that information with thousands of satellites. And then we issue every human on Earth a computer that has more computing capacity than the entire U.S. had 50 years ago. And that tells us how to get where we want to go. That's technology. It's amazing. But the bird solution's biological solution is so much more elegant, and it's very efficient. That's one of the hallmarks of biology. It always runs super efficient, and we haven't cracked that code yet. So it's ignorance. We haven't learned. And two, we're just hitting that problem harder and harder and harder. That's the hubris that makes us look only at the immediate solution, the technology solution, rather than insight from biology, perhaps.
So right now you're running a biotech company.
Right.
And it seems like the purpose of this biotech company is to create some solutions to help us get back into alignment so that way we can expand our health span, I believe. For those who are skeptical of biotechnology and this idea that you could live to be 200 years old, could you help to let's start by explaining like why this is even important, like to explore Healthspan through biotechnology as a vehicle to help us get there.
Well, there's a lot of important elements, I think, in biotechnology to extend human health span. And one of the elements is that our current medical paradigm has given us a lifespan that is, typically 70 some or whatever. But that our health span, that is the period of time that we are really healthy, is actually 12 and a half years shorter. In other words, oftentimes we are bedridden, infirm, not able to enjoy life for 12 and a half years of that lifespan. Now, that's a big negative. And we think that we can get past that for sure.
Okay.
And since I'm pushing 80, just on the cusp of 80, and I have a couple of people who have been in this cohort of 3 of us doing this for almost 20 years now, each of us has the same characteristics. Extremely vital, energetic life. One guy plays golf constantly, and he's apologizing because he's teeing off the ladies' tees, but he's 85.
Yeah.
Okay, and he's doing better than a lot of the younger guys. And the other fellow who's an engineer is basically climbing mountains and trails and touring the U.S. All the time and just really enjoying life. So there's that aspect of it. Just being able to enjoy life, participate in it. The other part that I think is shockingly obvious is that there's been a lot of theories about why we age, and each has been disproven, curiously.
Oh, wow.
Let's look at the radical oxygen species argument, that we build up all this junk, and this junk kind of wears us out and we die. Well, it turns out that all of the information that we're finding about the radical oxygen species is basically signaling. It's not really junk, it's signaling, and the signals are getting confused because things aren't getting cleaned out, but it's not really fundamental to aging. There's another approach to aging that I think is a big technology approach, and that is we reprogram cells. We take healthy cells out of the body, we reprogram them so they become a stem cell. It's absolutely, could be anything from there. And then we reprogram it to become a new kind of cell that we put into the human being to improve their health. Now, there's billions of dollars been put into that. And to me, that may have some great solutions, just like our cell phone is a great solution to figure out how where we want to go. But there are other really fundamental differences if we focus just on those elements of the cell that wear out. And what wears out? It's your mitochondria. They produce 90% of the energy that's us. And there's a new theory of aging, which is really the energy maintenance argument. That is, that we are energetic beings, and that it is that we run down, we reduce our level of energy over time. And why is that? And that's where we've been exploring. How do we maintain the level of energy? And all of that is our mitochondria.
So it sounds like what you're saying is some of the vehicles that we've been using to help increase health span or lifespan, which I'd like to touch back on the difference in definition between those two for anyone who maybe doesn't know. But it sounds to me like vehicles that have been used are tackling more of the symptom rather than trying to solve the problem of why are we actually aging, because you had made the comment that they've all been disproved. Like any theory of like why are we aging has relatively been like debunked. Like, oh, that's not really why we're aging. So why do you think we are aging, and how can that root cause be manipulated or affected in order to have downstream effects toward health and lifespan?
Well, and the current latest thinking has identified 12 hallmarks of aging, and they include things like the telomere length and deregulation of the DNA, or protein twisting that occurs as we age. But of those 12, 9 are directly related to mitochondrial function.
Got it.
And that the mitochondria have a unique characteristic of having a negative 170 millivolts of electric potential. And that's all on the membranes in these mitochondria. And the mitochondria, they have 2 membranes, and they're folded sort of like our brain is folded. So there's more surface area, so they can actually make more ATP. And what we're seeing is that the mitochondria voltage drops over time as we age. And as we began to develop a crystalline structure that would actually help maintain the level of voltage at the mitochondrial level, that's when we began to see the huge improvement in overall health. And we're presuming that's also going to mean improvements in longevity.
So you're talking about this crystalline structure. Is that where the structured water comes in within the cell, or what are you referring to there?
Yes. So remember, Jerry Pollack had worked with membrane-like material. I think it was Naflon or something of the sort.
Naphine.
And
Yes.
he saw at the edge of this material structured water.
Mm-hmm.
And he began to find more and more evidence that this structured water, which is really a liquid crystal,
Mm-hmm.
was throughout our cells. That is our cytoplasm. That is on the edge of our mitochondria. That's on the edge of our cell membranes.
Mm-hmm.
And that, he thought, deteriorates over time.
Mm-hmm.
On our lab, we saw a crystal that would be able to hold a millivoltage. And we asked, if we introduced that crystal to the environment, would it allow the structured water around this Nafion to expand? And it does.
Now, when you say crystal,
Yes.
you're talking about like a stone crystal of some kind. What are you talking about?
Yeah. So it's a mineral complex.
Okay.
That is specifically formulated and processed to create a crystalline structure that holds a negative 330 millivolts of electric potential.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't fool around with this lightly. We've been at this about 25 years now, since 2003,
Wow.
actually focusing on the function of this crystal. And as our first steps, we went to the Food and Drug Administration and we said, does this look like it could be safe to you? They issued 2 letters. That's very rare that they respond. They said, yes, this looks like it's generally recognized as safe. Grass. So we went through the rest of the process. We went cytotoxicity studies, testing it on cells in Petri dishes.
Mm-hmm.
And it showed that it actually improved cellular function. Then we went to Stanford Research Institute and we said, can you find an LD50? That's 50% of the rats would die when given a dose. They couldn't find one, even at 3,000 times the normal expected human dose.
Could you just unpack that a little bit more?
Sure.
It's going over my head. LD50. What is that? So what does
LD50
that mean?
means lethal dose for 50% of the animals tested.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah. So even at 3,000
times the human dosage,
times the human dosage,
we would not. We couldn't kill the rats.
Got it. Okay.
Stanford Research Institute says, "Whoa, we've had enough."
Yeah. Did the rats have with higher dosages? Were they actually getting better?
The rats liked it. They were living a good life.
That's interesting.
So then we go to the Food and Drug Administration and we say, again, this is our data, and we'd like to test it on humans. I don't see any reason why not.
Mm-hmm.
And so we do 18 months human studies, and an independent lab goes out and interviews all the people. No negative side effects. And in fact, there were a couple of people who had serious problems with their bladder function. They had a condition called interstitial cystitis, which is a very painful bladder problem, urgency and frequency. Can't sleep through the night because you have to go to the bathroom so often.
Mm-hmm.
Even interrupts intimate relations,
Mm-hmm.
and it's just very awful. And so we went to the National Institute of Health, and they said, we'd be happy to have you in a competition for a product as a drug dealing with interstitial cystitis.
Yeah.
But it has to be a competition. Okay, we said, that's fine. A big pharma comes up, and they come up and they say, well, actually, we think that interstitial cystitis is a psychological problem.
Oh.
This is our proposed drug for it. The FDA, the NIH looks at both of them and says, big pharma, I think you're probably right. Let's do that. Now, you've talked about how points in life are synchronicity, and we look at what happens and we say, oh, darn, I wish that hadn't happened. And then when you look back at it and you say, God, I'm glad that didn't happen. Because what that meant was we went back to the Food and Drug Administration and they declared this product, this composition, this crystalline electrolyte, to be a new dietary ingredient. And they've issued 2 new dietary ingredient findings around this, which allows us to introduce it to the food chain, basically, as a dietary supplement or any sort of additional additive to food and whatnot. So it really makes it less expensive to get to more people faster.
How did you come to bring that to the table?
Well, it is a long story because Jerry Pollack was one really important element of that conversation, because we could see where this electric component of the cell was functioning. The other component was we wanted to deliver something that would enhance that. And so we did test structured water. And it's heavy, and it needs to be wrapped in a container that reduces EMFs and other things
that disrupt the structure, because it's an energetic process that structures it.
And so we needed something that was super stable. And so one fellow, as I mentioned, was a material scientist, had worked for NASA. Brilliant man.
This is someone on your team?
Yes.
Okay.
That's right. And the other fellow on the team was they'd worked together for many years, was a computer chip manufacturing specialist. And together, working together, a material scientist and a computer chip manufacturing specialist worked to develop this crystalline structure that would carry an electromotive potential, actually biological electrical nutrition, that was able to do the same thing as structured water. It actually would empower water to be structured without having to go through the whole business of doing the water, wrapping it, and getting it into the stream. And now we've had granules that have been manufactured 10 and 15 years ago that still maintain their full potential.
Oh, wow.
This is amazing breakthrough to actually build a battery. That's right. That would last for
maybe
over
decades.
A decade. Yeah. So we are quite keen about the potential of improving health span, not just by years, but by decades. That we're able to keep this structured water in the body and functioning at a higher level than was anticipated. So when we go to our tests, that we're finding improved hydration. Why? Well, the water's staying in the cells.
Yes, it's not leaking out.
It's not leaking out. And we're finding increases in VO2 max, which is directly related to the amount of oxygen that you're using effectively through your mitochondria.
Which Dr. Pollack had explained how structured water in the body would absolutely increase circulatory capacity in the human body.
Exactly.
Because it moves through capillary structures much more efficiently. And he explained a little story about how he was working with an engineer, a bioengineer. I don't remember the title, but basically the mechanics of the heart was his specialization. And he expressed how the heart could not possibly pump all the blood needed throughout all the capillaries and the blood vessels in the human body. It's just not strong enough. It would have to be, I don't remember how many times stronger, but in the podcast he explains it more with Dr. Pollack. So it would make sense that if you have more structured water in your body, you're increasing circulatory potential, which therefore would mean that you're going to have a higher VO2 max.
Yes. And you'll also see lower blood pressure. Now, we're not supposed to say that on our product, and we don't. Because that's a sort of a medical claim. But it just didn't make sense. If the water is more structured and it goes through your veins more easily, it doesn't have to have as much pressure.
Well, that's also true. I spoke with someone that we might interview in the future who created a device that structures water, and they've done a lot of experiments.
Okay,
It's a, I believe it's a vortexing type device or a micro bubbler or something. I have to get more. He explained it to me, but he knows more about it.
Of course.
But the point is that it's a device that structures the water, and um, they've run some studies on it. But they will use it as a pre-filter, like before the water, like water comes in, goes through the structuring device, then goes through the filter, and then it'll come out on the other side of the filter,
ready to be consumed.
Or
Right.
they use it a lot in car washes, car wash buildings, because it increases the flow rate.
Oh,
And it actually,
of course it would.
exactly, and it also, because it breaks down the water into a smaller form, or like think of like large globules of water and then really small globules of water. So when the water's structured, it's able to flow much better through the filter. It actually is cleaner. The filter lasts longer, and so that has been proven, at least from the studies that he's done, and they sell a lot because it works. And so that alone, I've also heard it in terms of like whole home water filtration systems and whatnot, that it'll just expand the life. So it makes sense that that would also happen in the body, which would then reduce blood pressure. I mean, we don't want to make claims,
Sure.
but the logic is
Well,
there.
and it reduces your heart rate too, because the heart doesn't have to work as hard. It works more just as a metronome.
Yeah.
You're telling your body, all right, now's the time to do it.
Yes.
and so the heart is not as stressed. And the result, of course, is that all of our tests show that the time to exhaustion when you're doing very heavy work is extended very, very substantially. And those are not indications so that we can make a performance claim or a claim for athletes or anything of that sort. It's just to recognize the changes in the human physiology that's occurring as we get a higher quality water into our system, and that it's able to be structured with the inclusion of this crystal. And the crystal is NION. It stands for negative ions. That it means that it has a negative electrical charge. It's bionutrition, and it has that characteristic of improving the overall function of the water in your body. And to us, that is, well, that was the holy grail. If you could actually increase VO2 max, and we did it with 20-year-olds. Now, if you'll recall, you're kind of at your peak at age 20, you know?
Yeah, I definitely
you recall that.
I recall. Yeah, I recall. It was in the past. Yeah.
and we were able to increase their VO2 max significantly in human performance trials at Montana State University. Independent study, and people chosen at random.
Double blind, I believe.
Blind,
yeah,
all
double
that.
blind placebo, like the pinnacle of the kinds of studies you'd want to do.
And then peer reviewed and published.
Yes.
So it's been proven and shown conclusively that this crystal does have physiological improvements in your overall health, even at age 20. Now, at my age, where my VO2 max and all those other characteristics typically would be declining, it's doing very well, extremely well. In fact, I had a cardio test not too long ago, and the doctors were just blown away by the results. They hadn't expected it. Another aspect of this was that about 3 years ago, I had a traumatic brain injury.
Okay.
And after the injury, I couldn't recall the name of the president. I was pretty messed up.
Oh, wow.
I couldn't remember names of people that I'd interviewed for jobs. I didn't recognize their faces.
Oh, no.
I was really a mess. And it's hard work, and the body repairs itself. And the doctors, when they were reviewing me, we did these cognitive tests, and they kind of, using their medical speak, said, well, this is a slippery slope, and you just slipped on it. And I'm not sure you're going to come back, Mr. Loyd.
Oh, wow.
And but I have. And it's not just me. There's another fellow who's one of the folks that have been taking the product for a long time as part of a test. He's in his mid-70s now, but he's an avid cyclist living in Colorado. He and his wife were out cycling, and a car coming up from behind wasn't paying attention, hit him, and threw him over a cliff and onto rocks down below.
Oh my gosh.
He broke ribs. He cracked his vertebrae. His leg was messed up. They weren't thinking he was going to survive. They got him to the ER. They patched him together. I'm sorry, we're not going to survive this experience, Lynn. You probably better get your act together and do whatever you have to do. 9 months later, he was skiing on the slopes at Bachelor again. He attributes it to the fact that he was able to heal himself like a much younger person, which is the same thing I experienced when I had a traumatic brain injury. So it's not just that your mitochondria are stronger and so you maintain an energy level and everything's good. I think oftentimes when we get hurt, then we test our repair systems to see how good are we at getting fixed.
This is phenomenal. Yeah. So I had just had an interview with Jonathan Jarecki, and he talks about this in quite a bit of detail about how the human body, his perspective, he believes that the human body is an energetic form,
Yes.
Primarily, like at its most fundamental level, it's an electric system, and that leads into discussions about on the topics of Dr. Pollack's work, where
Yes.
he learned that and had proven this out in his laboratory, that the structuring of water is structured by energetic forms or energetic systems like sunlight or
Yes.
any kind of light, but there's nuance to that we can get
Of
into.
course, yeah.
And sound can structure water, which is another energetic form.
Yep.
And then he even proved that consciousness can structure water. I don't know if he's published that yet, but he told me in the interview, he was like, we saw it in the laboratory. Someone and I'm going to interview him actually next week. The person who did it.
I'm going to subscribe.
Oh yeah, yeah. So I want to try to get to the bottom of what's going on there, because which leads me to believe that consciousness itself is somehow on the electromagnetic spectrum, because that's all these, like, water seems to be interfacing with this in some capacity, and we have evidence that it interfaces with light. We have evidence that it interfaces with sound, and we have evidence that it interfaces with consciousness. And so, if that's the case, it makes sense that this mission that you're on to help expand Healthspan and Lifespan, it would make the most sense to tackle the subject of water and electrical potential in the human body, because that is probably one of the most fundamental elements within the body. And if you can positively affect such a fundamental system, then it has so many upstream benefits. I think of a graph like a tree, where you have the singular trunk and then it branches out into so many other things. And structured water really is one of those things where if we increase structured water in the body, it seems like we have many different kinds of expanded benefits that happen. And so, in getting back to the question of what is the root cause of aging and how do we tackle that, rather than trying to put band-aids on fixing the mess that gets made, structured water really seems, and the electrical potential of the body, which those two seem to be very closely tied. Maybe the water in the body is the medium by which the electrical potential is maintained, absorbed, transmitted, etc., which that's what Dr. Pollack believes. Is he says it's not so much the structured water itself, it is the charge, the negative charge that it carries.
Exactly.
And then that negative charge is able to permeate between cell walls and membranes all throughout the body very easily. So you don't actually have to move water cells around in the body as much. You're really just moving the charge around, which what you're saying is, hey, let's remove the weight of the water so we're not consuming a ton of structured water, we don't have to. We can create this mineral, or would you consider it a mineral?
Yes, it's a mineral. It's an electrolyte.
Yeah. Okay.
It's structured electrolytes.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so instead of consuming it, or instead of consuming the structured water being structured externally, we can structure it internally. Which, after talking to Dr. Pollock, I have to be honest, I'm not entirely sold on anything that structures water externally and then we drink it and then hopefully expect that it's gonna, because I wonder how well it maintains. However, going out into the sun, getting grounded. Once again, you're connected to the negatively charged Earth, so you're able to exchange negative ions that way. And the sunlight with the full spectrum energy transmitting through the body and then able to structure the water in the body. And those are all methods of structuring the existing water within your system.
Right.
And what you're talking about is along that same lines. That's why whenever we got connected, I was like, okay, this is different than just regular vitamins or a drug or something else. This is something different because it's doing the same kind of mechanism that all these other natural systems do, that there's a ton of evidence for, and how that has these downstream health effects. So I think I follow.
Yeah, I think you've got it very precisely. And the idea that we are electric beings runs a little bit counter to many of the medical models that see us really as a bag of chemicals.
Yeah.
A bunch of things all doing stuff.
Yep.
When in fact, we are much more energetic beings. And the idea that consciousness exists somewhere on that spectrum, I'm 100% into. In fact, one of my gifts to my wife, who, like you said, is our wives tend to be intuitively stronger than we are. One of my gifts to my wife was a company called 3IC. It was to look at elements of consciousness.
Okay.
3IC, a nonprofit organization that we are formed to look into consciousness, because we are absolutely convinced that as part of the spectrum of why health can last much longer than we anticipate, and that we're not just a bag of chemicals. We're much, much more.
Maybe now is a good time to explain the difference between Healthspan and lifespan. You touched on it a little bit, where you mentioned that the last 12-ish years of life is not really healthy, but could you dive into that a little bit more?
Yeah, these are broad concepts. And of course, we always keep track of what is the lifespan of various countries. And the U.S. lifespan has been declining slightly, I think probably due to the pandemic and other things of that sort. But the real piece that has been troubling is the health span. That is the period of time that we are active, healthy, fully engaged, we have mobility, we're just healthy. And that span between the period that we are healthy and the period that we die is actually getting larger. And my personal experience was with my dad when he passed away. He had a stroke, and the doctor said, "I'm here to save you." And sure enough, they saved his life, and he spent the next 12 to 15 years in bed. That's not a solution. And his dad, when he had a stroke, he died. It was day one, he was enjoying life. Day two, he didn't get out of bed. And I'm not sure that's where we want to go with life.
Yeah, to prolong
you
suffering.
Don't want to prolong the suffering. And we want to be healthy as long as we are alive. And if we're able to maintain a high quality of energy, mitochondria functioning well, no doubt there's going to be disease, there's going to be illness, there's going to be accidents and things of that sort. But as much as we possibly can to reduce the gap between lifespan and health span, so that we are really healthy right up till the very end. And that creates so much more value to our lives. I don't want to be a burden to my kids And they certainly don't want me to be a burden either, I suspect. And I want to enjoy life as much as possible throughout that time. One of my board members had a piece of advice for me. He said, when you get older, you'll find that you like to travel and that every great view is at the end of 110 steps up. So you got to be in pretty good shape when you're traveling to really enjoy it much. Yeah. And that's sort of a metaphor for life too.
Well, so it seems to me like these two things could go together, where if we understand how to provide the environment for the body to heal itself, we could still benefit from medical interventions that save someone's life from stroke if after the stroke we are then implementing
absolutely
some sort of remedy, whether it be, hey, let's really increase the amount of structured water in this person's body, or whatever it might be. I'm not the person to answer that question, but because then there's the potential of like we've given them enough time to actually go through the healing process to then have more years maybe later of health span.
Well, Joe Pizzorno, the founder of Bastyr University, the Pacific Northwest that major naturopathic university, said that the great problem in medicine now is that it has been so effective at stopping trauma and pain and suffering that we look to it for everything. And it really isn't meant for everything. It can get us past, very effectively, past that trauma. And I think you hit the nail on the head, Zach, that once we're stable, then being able to evolve and heal, that is a big, big next step. That's how you get to a 200-year life, not by being so careful that you never have an accident. It's being able to heal after you've had the accident and to have strong medical help to get you stable and good to take the next step of healing.
So touching back on the mitochondria discussion, could you elaborate a little bit more on the mechanism by which this negative charge, when introduced into the body, can help the mitochondria? Is it just that the negative charge transfers over to the mitochondria and that negatively charges?
Well, you're thinking of it still in mechanical terms.
Okay.
And the beauty of electrons is that they're not always a thing. That is, for example, we've had athletes who have cramps in their legs after they jump out of the water doing their next phase of the Ironman. They'll cramp up and they'll take these granules, this electrolyte, and bang, it's gone. Now that electrolyte, that material, has not entered the mouth, gone into the digestive system, and all into the bloodstream. No, it is an electrical signal that is actually cascading through the body very quickly. That is really fundamentally how it works. But when you also look at the mitochondria, they have an electron transport chain that actually produces the ATP. That electronic transport chain can get gummed up if there's not enough electrons around. And so that's what you try. It has both a quantum element and a material element to it that are really difficult for us in this material world to actually fully understand.
Got it. So if we think of the mitochondria like little batteries themselves within our system, when we introduce something like NION or sunlight or grounding, that helps to recharge the mitochondria, so that way the electron transport chain is able to function and effectively grease the wheels on that system, so that way they can operate, and then we get more ATP production potentially. And I know that Dr. Pollack has a slightly different perspective on where like the energy source comes from, whether it's exactly ATP or if it's from the structured water directly. But it seems like regardless of what the last step is, this negative charge precedes it.
It's a necessary component. And fundamentally, knowing that we came from the sea as single cell organisms, that our blood serum in many ways reflects the chemical composition and the electrical charge of the ancient sea that we evolved from, and that through our entire evolution, whether it's on sea or on land, we have been part of an electric flow. The earth has an electric negative charge. We need that. That is part of who we are. Now, we've segregated ourselves from it.
Right now we're not grounded.
We're not grounded now.
No.
Yeah.
I mean, even if, I'm wearing shoes that have rubber soles on them right now, and those rubber soles are insulating. So even if I were to walk outside, I wouldn't be grounded. But if I come inside and take my shoes off, the flooring inside this home is not grounded either. So the reality is you have to ask yourself, how often do you walk outside without shoes? And if you don't, then when are you really getting grounded?
Yes,
right?
Exactly right.
Because you're not doing it inside, most likely.
Yeah. Well, Gail and I have grounding sheets on our beds. And of course, we live in Seattle, not far from a beach. And we are very regular, sort of sit on the beach and just enjoy the sunshine, kind of people. But you're right. We've evolved, so we need that, but we don't get it.
Yes, which is where interventions like something like NION could help provide some of that negative charge. Because if you're not getting full spectrum sunlight, then you're not getting that, you're not structuring the water. If you're not grounded, then you're not getting that negative charge. If you're, if you're not connected to nature, you're not getting this. But something like NION could help if you're someone like me who sits in an office most of the time to do work. And I do have a grounded floor mat that I will put my feet on. But
good.
Ideally, when I actually design my house, I have a whole idea for how I'm going to do the office space in order to optimize for all those elements in the environment.
Well, I'm very interested in all of that because I do think having our physical environment attuned to some of our natural physical needs, not just aesthetic, which is important, but our actual physical needs are very important. And I was involved with some design work in the past for real estate development, and I could see people's behavior changing, because of the design characteristics of the places that they were at, whether it's on the street or in their homes. And so I'm really keenly interested in what you're doing, Zach, in this
thanks.
wild dwelling concept.
This project.
Yeah.
I can explain more on that, but I wanted to touch on one thing because we talked about how it increases VO2 max, and likely the mechanism by which it's increasing VO2 max, which is, by the way, it's it's one of those longevity indicators.
Yes.
They talk about hand-eye coordination is one, grip strength is another. VO2 max is another. And so it's one of those longevity indicators. So to be able to have a double-blind placebo study that shows that a product actually can increase VO2 max is phenomenal. Understanding the mechanism behind why that happens makes sense because there's plenty of other examples of that same mechanism doing that same work. And what's funny is that you had shared that the studies were done about the double-blind placebo studies, or the trials that you guys did. It was about a week from when they started taking it to when they would be tested. Is that right?
Yeah. They were taking it for 6 days in a row at a rate of about, I think, 3,000 grams a day.
Okay. Is that one pack? Is that like one pouch? That you guys have?
One pouch.
Okay.
And the lead investigator, when he saw the results, he was very excited, and he said, "We need to do this just for 1 day, just to see what happens." And I understand that you kind of did that, didn't you?
Yeah, I did. So when you sent some over, Um, I, I, I wanted to take it right away.
Mm-hmm.
But I know that I'm probably susceptible to placebo,
Oh yeah.
and I didn't know, I was like, I need something that is like a biometric,
Ah,
meter or something.
yeah.
I'd say I need to do something, get some baseline data, and then do some testing on baseline, and then take it, and then do some testing. So that way, it's not just like, oh, I feel better.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I want some information, so I'm not, lying to myself just because, like, I think I might be more susceptible than most to placebo.
Yeah.
I'm very hopeful of things, and so I ended up borrowing my wife's Aura ring,
Sure.
uh, and uh, uh, I put that on. I got a couple weeks of regular baseline data,
Sure.
and then I did their walking test. I did that several days in a row. I had a
Mm-hmm.
pretty strong baseline VO2 max, because it'll give you like a VO2 max estimate,
Yeah.
and it was pretty much the same it was the same every single day.
Yeah.
And it was okay. It was pretty good. I mean, for someone who sits at their desk as often as I do, which needs to change. But anyway, I felt like I had a good enough baseline, so I took the pouch. I didn't want to wait another week, because it had already been about a month to get this process set up. Um, and so I grabbed the pouch, not the pill form, the pouch form, and I
Yeah.
just dumped it in some water, drank it within an hour, maybe even less than an hour after. I said, I'm going to go do the walking test. I don't know if it's, it honestly might have been 20 or 30 minutes. Like, it was pretty soon after I took it.
Yeah.
Um, I did the walking test again, like I did every morning, in that routine. And I looked back at the number, and it said that my VO2 max jumped. I want to say it was like 6 points, which is
That's
crazy.
crazy. That's great. That's super.
Yeah.
That reduced your all-cause mortality by 30%.
Yes. That's wild. Yeah, because I think it jumped up to hit 46. So I think I was at
Wow.
40,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
and then
Yeah.
after taking this, within an
Wow.
hour, it was 46,
Yeah.
and it's stayed at 46. I tested for a few days after it did like this jump, and then it was
Yeah.
flat at
Yeah. Yeah.
46 for a few days. I tested it every day after, and then I just stopped testing it. I want to test it again now, because it's been
Mm-hmm.
about a month since I
Mm-hmm.
did
Mm-hmm.
that,
Mm-hmm.
and so I'm curious if it's inched up anymore. But that was crazy. Oh, and then after, I did actually feel really good. Like,
Yeah.
I was going through a period of time where I was just feeling really worn down and drained, and I
Yeah.
was working
Yeah.
too much,
Yeah.
and there was just so much going on. And after I took it, I felt more like I was playing with my children more. Felt like I had
Yeah.
more energy, and seeing that number also, was like, oh, it's actually, so what I'm feeling is actually real. And my wife noticed it too. She was like, yeah, you seem more alive,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
you're not like a zombie, you're more alive. I was like, I feel alive. And so I was like, I think I'm gonna work out this morning. And
Oh.
I was like, yeah, I'll do that. And so I got on the squat rack, and I put on I don't remember the weight, but I remember that close to um it was close to my max squat.
Right. Right.
Like, I
Right.
wouldn't
Right.
do my
Right. Right.
max, like my 1 rep max, but, like, like an 8 rep
Okay.
max, from a few months ago when I was working out much more consistently. But I had not worked out in this period of time because I was doing business work
Sure.
far too much. It had been a few months that I hadn't really exercised, and so I got back into it, and I got to the squat rack, and Bree was like, are you sure you want to do that weight?"
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
said,
Yeah.
"Yeah, I feel good. Let me try it." And so I did a squat. I did 8 squats. I did 10 squats.
Really?
And I was like, I feel like this is great. I did 20 squats. This is all one set.
Yeah.
I did 30 squats. I did 40.
Gee, Merry Christmas.
Yeah, I did 40, and I was like, and in my mind, I was like, I should stop. I don't want to hurt
Yeah.
myself.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
But energy wise, like, I felt like I could just keep going,
Yeah.
and and then I just finished out a whole exercise after that. But it was like turning the lights on. It was wild. Now I've been taking it more consistently, and so I
Mm-hmm.
feel
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
more consistently energized. It wasn't like that
Yeah.
dramatic of, a change. But that's just my anecdotal personal experience, and I'm not being paid to say that. I was hoping that it would be that profound for me. Um, I just wasn't expecting that it would actually work, and it did.
Well, it's pretty phenomenal that way.
Yeah.
Um, it's not what you would normally expect to happen so fast, because we're so accustomed to it has to go into the digestive system, it has to circulate, etc. And you don't feel like a jolt of energy either. It's
No,
sort of like, yeah, that's the way I'm supposed to feel.
I did not feel like I had taken a stimulant. So the way
Yeah,
I described it to
yeah.
Bree, my wife, is I said, what I feel right now,
Mm-hmm.
this feels like what this feels normal.
Yes.
I've just been informed by taking this product. I've just been informed that my life for the last however long, that is not normal. Like that is me, that is zombie Zach, I want to be normal again. And so that's very different from a stimulant where I feel
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
like something is like pulling me forward.
yeah, that's
Whereas
right.
this
Yeah,
felt like I was just back to being me,
yeah.
which is which was amazing to
And
feel.
humans are amazingly adaptable. That's one of our greatest traits, I think, is that we adapt to our environment, we adapt to ourselves, we adapt to our limitations, and we adapt when we get improvement.
Hmm.
So it's going to seem very normal, natural, very it's the way it's supposed to be.
Hmm.
If you stop taking it, you'll find yourself returning to your baseline.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then you'll call us up and you'll say, could you rush some of that over to me again, please?
Yeah. Oh goodness.
Because we found that people who have been taking this product for a long time, and we've had a process of when we do double-blind placebo-controlled studies and people see the benefit from it,
Hmm.
we don't feel as though it's fair to keep it away, and so we've offered it to them, even though we hadn't really been offering it generally to the public.
Okay.
And then when we finally get confirmation that we improve VO2 max, and we sat down with a National Institute of Health fellow to analyze the data, and they concluded that it actually was mitochondrial improvements that were going on. That's when we said, we've reached the holy grail. This is
Yeah.
what we wanted. And so we named the company Galahad
There you
Life
go.
Sciences, because Galahad was searching for the holy grail, and
Uh-huh.
et cetera, et cetera. And the other part of the story of Galahad is that he was near death when an angel came to him and said, it's really important that you achieve this holy grail and get it. And he said, well, I'm committed, but I'm not sure I can overcome all these obstacles. And he just said, the angel said, I'm going to grant you immortality so that you can achieve this. He said, okay, angel, I have one condition on receiving immortality, and that is that I want to decide when I die.
Oh,
I want to decide if my life is complete, that I'm not stuck here on earth forever.
that is a great condition. Yeah.
And that is the human spirit,
Uh-huh.
is that,
Take
I
charge.
want to feel alive and in charge until I don't want to do it anymore,
Yeah. That's interesting.
So that's what Galahad's about. It's trying to grant us not just an additional year or two, but decades of additional full health.
And so Galahad is the parent company,
Right.
NION is the product.
That's right.
And so we didn't really explain exactly what NION is. We explained that it's a kind of electrolyte,
Yeah.
crystal mineral type element. It comes in, you've got packaged it in pill forms, but you also have these like packets, almost like a
Right.
drink pouch that you put in your drink.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and But can you explain a little bit more about what it's made of? Like
Sure,
what even is,
sure.
what is it, and where does it come from? The ingredients.
Well, first of all, the ingredients are naturally occurring minerals,
Hmm.
calcium carbonate, with basic seashells, okay,
Oh, okay.
and potassium hydroxide, which is potash, I guess is the traditional term. Magnesium hydroxide, magnesium product, things of that sort. And the difference is that these naturally occurring minerals are first of all sourced from incredibly pure sources.
Hmm.
Now, the calcium carbonate, for example, comes from a seabed that is sort of Precambrian period seabed. So almost no contaminants at all. So it passes all the tests. And we pull those together in an environment to create a new crystalline structure made from these minerals. And crystals are nothing more than just an orderly structure of the molecules,
Hmm.
just like water, H2O, except that in a liquid crystal format, they form a very standard,
That hexagonal
yes,
structure.
structure. And so our crystal is natural minerals in this crystalline format, and it's able to hold an electric charge. And it doesn't dissipate over time. It dissipates, it releases when it hits the moisture of your body. When it actually is ingested, it releases that. And
Interesting. Okay.
that is fundamentally how it works.
Excellent. And which is phenomenal because I can only imagine the shipping costs in trying to transport structured water because of its weight and volume.
Yes.
But the weight and volume is dramatically reduced in terms of like how much structuring it can do per gram.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So the efficiency in terms of distribution makes way more sense as a product than starting like a structured water company,
Right.
where it might even be difficult to guarantee that the structuring is going to be maintained through transportation because you have all this jostling that occurs
Right.
and there's turbulence can destructure water, and so there's
Too
a lot
much
of
heat, electromotive
yeah.
interference around it, all sorts of
Yeah. Well,
things.
and also structuring water, from what I understand based on my conversation with Dr. Pollock, is that it seems to be directly correlated to the exposure to the energetic bodies like sunlight or
Yes.
sound. And when that goes away, the structuring starts to
Dissipate.
shrink,
Yep.
yeah, back down. And so
Mm-hmm.
it's like, well, what good is it? That's kind of my mind. It's like, what good is it to structure something externally and then try to drink it when it's like there's all this turbulence? But the other thought that crossed my mind was like, well, one of the things that structures water is infrared, radiation,
Right.
and the body emits tons of infrared radiation. So
That's right.
couldn't I just drink any water? And once it goes in my body, I have hydrophilic surfaces,
Right.
right,
Right. Right. Right.
all
Right.
throughout
Right.
my
Mm-hmm.
digestive system,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and now I have the surface area required, I have the water required, and I have the infrared radiation that's being emitted by my body. That
Right.
it seems like as long as uh, I'm, but maybe the missing ingredient is like, well, does your body actually have the negative charge needed to see? This is where it's starting to go over my head. But in theory, I was like, I don't see why I should have to buy structured water, but
Sure.
I think my body should be able to create structured water within it, just like it creates it from sun exposure or sound exposure or grounding exposure to the earth. But this is another one of those methods that can help.
Yeah. And I consider it more an adjunct to what is the ideal environment in which we would be um, fully exposed to sunlight,
Hmm.
not overexposed,
Correct. Yep.
in touch with the earth, uh, probably sleeping on the earth.
Hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. Under the moon and stars.
Yeah. And when we were testing the water, that was a major problem in that it would dissipate fairly rapidly just by a normal environmental degradation. We had that same problem too.
Hmm.
When you eat, what is it? What? can of soda. That detracts a lot from your electric energy.
Yeah.
And so what you'll find is more and more things will be detracting from your electric energy than you imagine in our evolved world here.
So, are there any other? I want to get into what kind of elements are detracting um, next, but before we get into that, um,
Mm-hmm.
are there any? Are you aware of any current medical practices that are targeting repairing mitochondrial function, like from that charge perspective, or is that not really a common?
Well, you see, our naturopathic physician graduated from Bastyr University, a brilliant scientist, um, began prescribing infrared radiation
Mhm.
for
Yeah,
us. You may do the same thing.
yeah, like a
Uh,
red light type.
yeah,
Yeah.
and so we do that twice a week. Now, just part of our prescribed routine. Um, the other thing is a cold plunge.
Oh, okay.
Is sort of like 40-degree water. It's cold.
Yeah.
And if you can do that for like 3 minutes or so,
Hmm.
it has an amazing restart uh, characteristic. And fasting. Gail and I both went on a 10-day water fast. That is where
Wow.
you just drink water and that's it.
Did you
And
have NION during that fast?
I did,
Yeah.
yes.
Okay.
And what this idea that aging is in part due to our ability to maintain our energy levels,
Hmm.
that is, maintain our production of ATP. There's a lot of controversy around this intermittent fasting or even outright fasting as mechanisms to increase your longevity. What they're finding now is that when we go into a water fast, your actual ATP production goes up.
Okay.
So it really does generate more energy as a result of not getting as much food. I think we use a lot of energy to digest our food,
Hmm.
to take it into our body, and all that kind of business. But during that 10-day period, that was reaffirmed because my thinking processes were so clear.
Hmm.
It was just a real eye opener, actually, insofar as getting a big boost in my mitochondria.
Hmm.
And the brain is the primary use of our energy anyway.
You're right. Yeah, it's the heart, the brain. These are
Yep,
electrical systems.
that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, and apparently the rest of the body is, because it's all made of water, and
Yeah.
that's the vehicle for electrical potential.
So all that they would let us drink would be water, of
Hmm.
course, and pure water,
Yep.
and then we took NION, and so that it was a very very positive experience for us. And we came out of that. We lost weight, of course,
Hmm.
about a pound or two a day,
Oh, wow.
and but felt great.
Yeah.
And then you are reintroduced to food very gradually too. You
Hmm.
just have very pure, great food, vegetables primarily, which is another source of structured water, actually.
Yes. Yeah. Dr. Pollock had mentioned this.
Yeah,
Fruit, I guess vegetables, the water contained within those cells is highly
yeah,
structured.
yeah.
Yeah.
So there's a very thoughtful process to maintain high levels of structured water in our body, and we were just using NION as a major component of that, but that's not all of it.
For
Yeah.
sure. Okay. Do you know of any? You mentioned that your naturopathic doctor is focused on this. I imagine maybe more and more these days, doctors are
Mm-hmm.
starting to turn their focus toward that in their protocols that they're prescribing to their patients. It probably hasn't made it to hospitals yet, I imagine.
No, and the current management of our medical system is done by insurance companies,
Yes, I've heard about
And
this.
the doctors are not particularly happy with MBAs describing what procedures are going to be funded.
Hmm.
But that's the fact, that people who have not been trained in medicine are actually deciding what we get. And so the doctors have to develop workarounds to get what they think we need. So part of the system's not serving us very well that
Well,
way.
it's a business,
It's a
right?
business.
And
That's right.
you're not going to make you're not going to make a whole lot of money if people start fasting more because they're going to be buying less food, right?
Yeah.
Just like we're
Right.
not going to be making as much money if we're healthy, you know.
Well, but the actual study done at Oxford regarding the amount of wealth that would be created by extending human life by 1 year in the U.S. When I'm talking about extending human life, I mean health span.
Hmm.
It runs in the range of trillions of dollars.
If it can be packaged and sold, right?
Well, no, it's actual human output.
Oh, you mean like literally the GDP, of the nation for having people
Yeah,
have an extra
because
year of
people
productive life.
are active,
Yes.
they're participating, they're doing stuff.
Yeah.
They're not in hospitals getting treated.
Yeah. But that is a political concern, I think, of like a nation saying, hey, like I
Mm-hmm.
think you would need a politician to step up and say, we need to make decisions that increase the overall output of our nation. Whereas if you look at it from a more ice or more segmented um, commercial perspective or an individual business, there is no reason to make decisions internally that cost internally in order to impact the GDP of the nation. We just need to increase the the revenue for the company, right?
Yeah. And I changed my career not because I wanted to increase the revenue of USA.
Yeah.
I was sitting beside my mom as she was dying, and realized that I wasn't fulfilling my life um, by making money and teaching other people how to make money and all that business. So I threw that away and decided to focus on something that I really loved. And then other decisions happen along the way, like when National Institute of Health decided, well, we weren't going to fund this product as a drug.
Hmm.
And I was so upset. Then I realized, my God, if this was classified as a drug, it would cost a whole lot more.
Okay.
It would be taken over by a big pharma,
Hmm.
and it would be repackaged, and it wouldn't be generally available as I had thought it might be.
That's an interesting point. That's another one of those moments where you're like, oh, maybe it is better that it didn't happen that way.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's that things are things happen oftentimes not because we are in charge.
Yeah.
It just happens, and just we have to be thoughtful and graceful enough to accept it.
Well, there's also the public perception of the product itself if it's classified as a drug.
Yes.
I wouldn't be taking it if it was classified as a
Right.
drug because
Yeah.
I don't.
Yeah. Yeah.
My family, we don't take drugs.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Period.
Yeah.
Right. So, though this is getting back into like the categorization topic that we were discussing, right?
Yeah.
Oh, is that a cup? Is that a cup? It's like, well, that's a drug. That's a drug. I understand drugs, and I know that we don't do those.
Yes. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
this is something different. So, for people who are pursuing health, I think fewer and fewer are actually, those are going in separate directions. It seems,
Absolutely.
yeah.
They are. Yeah.
So I want to start navigating this conversation to learn a little bit more about you and your background and who you are,
Oh.
because I think that that's going to help to lay down a foundation, because you're not just some like random guy, that's like, hey, I put some seashells, crushed up some, you're like in your kitchen with
Yeah.
your mortar and pestle,
Yeah.
crushing
Yeah.
up some
Yeah. Yeah.
seashells, or like, try this. Okay, so can you let's start with your education. Now,
Sure.
my understanding is that you are highly educated, maybe 4 or 5 different.
Well, I've got a number of degrees. Yeah, I've got 4 degrees, two in sort of PhD level stuff. But
Well, could you go through some
yeah,
of those?
so when I was at the University of Washington,
Mhm.
it was the Vietnam War. Okay.
Okay.
And it was very similar to architecture school because in organic chemistry, you'd look at the person to the left of you, look at the person to the right of you, and if they were gone, that meant you were going to stay. Or if they stayed, you were gone because only
1/3 of the
1/3
class.
actually graduates. Yeah, can really get through it. And unfortunately, in Vietnam, during the Vietnam War, if you didn't keep your credits up, you were in the rice paddies.
Okay.
You were drafted. So it was a highly motivated time.
Mm-hmm.
You had very
To
good
be
grades
good, yeah.
in organic chemistry and embryology and all that sort of stuff. And when I finished, I'd also picked up a degree in history along the way because I was fascinated
You're just like,
by human, nature, that kind
Yeah.
of thing. And when I graduated, I was accepted to Georgetown University Medical School, and something just didn't feel right about it. I had a Brie moment, let's call it, or a
Okay.
Gale moment,
Yeah.
where it just didn't feel right. And so I bought a Volkswagen van, and I had been lucky enough to graduate from school with money's always been easy
Mm-hmm.
for me to come by. So I had a lot of cash and bought a Volkswagen van and traveled around the country for a couple of years and just enjoyed life. One time I started a business in Key West, Florida, taking people out, bought a sailboat and took people out.
So
fishing.
were you a hippie?
I was a hippie.
Okay, that's what it sounds like. I
Honest to
think you're
God,
telling
I was
me.
a hippie.
Awesome.
I painted my Volkswagen bus with patio paint.
There you go.
And when a state trooper stopped me, he leaned up against the van and said, "Oh God, what is that?" Because it stuck to his uniform.
Uh-huh.
It was a time when I decided, if I'm going to survive, I should really have a degree in law.
Oh, okay.
Because when we were in Florida, the Coast Guard pulled us over. How in the world could you guys have enough money to have this 35-foot catch
Yeah.
and not be doing drugs?
Yeah.
And it just happened to be that I was really good with money, and I graduated from school with a lot of cash. So anyway, they had us pull over and anchor in Key Biscayne Bay for months on end, and I got all
Months?
I got all upset because they had no reason to actually do that. But of course, they did have a pistol on their hip. So you did what they said, and that's when I decided to go to law school. Sold my boat to a fellow who had a place up in Bar Harbor. Went back to school at the University of Washington. First week of law school, I realized that was not going to be an avenue I wanted to have my career in. It's a confrontation environment.
Mm-hmm.
You argue, and decide.
But you ended up you got the degree, and then
But I was not a quitter either. Yeah. So
sure.
So
you saw it all the way through.
I saw it all the way through.
You took the exams, and
I took the bar. Yeah, and also picked up a degree in finance at the University of Washington in business.
Wow.
And my first job was actually working for the Seattle City Council. There had just been a movement to choose an effective city council, check, I think. And it was part of a reform movement because there had been some graft and corruption going on.
Mm-hmm.
And I was given way more responsibility than I had any right to have, but I learned a lot. We negotiated agreements with regard to Ross Dam, whether or not it should be raised and back water up into Canada. What are the conditions under which police would surveil and gather information on people who had not committed crimes? Under what conditions would police use deadly force? Things of that sort. I mean, I was just right out of law school,
mm-hmm.
working with the prosecuting attorney and everybody else in the police force to solve these sort of issues. But I got the attention of a very wealthy family in Seattle, and they had an objective to buy 11 city blocks in downtown Seattle between Pike Place Market and Pioneer Square, and change that so that the connection between downtown Seattle office and the waterfront was a cohesive residential area. And it was a mind-blowing experience. And we got Weyerhaeuser involved, and we ended up rebuilding those 11 city blocks in downtown Seattle with a major world-class architect. And it was quite an adventure.
That has to be one of the largest projects
It was
in the
enormous.
state, maybe the country.
Yeah, it had Urban Land Institute awards
Hmm.
back and forth, and the crowning jewel was the harbor steps that connected First Avenue to the waterfront
Hmm.
in a beautiful place for outdoor events, and just be put Seattle's front door into the office
Yeah.
space, and it really created a much better environment. And it so captured the attention of the population, the people of Seattle, that they decided to tear down the viaduct that was separating us from the waterfront.
That's
So
amazing.
it really did serve us very, very well.
When
And
I
then,
was when I was in architecture school,
oh
my
yes,
professor had shared a story. It was a positive, like it was like a this is an example of good urban design and development.
yeah,
And he talks about how Seattle is the only state or the city. Seattle's the only city that has actually removed a highway in order to create more walkability and connectivity and create a more solid urban boundary, to improve the design of the city.
yeah,
And that, so that is actually the same
that's the
project.
one. That's the
Yeah,
one.
it's
Yeah.
so wild to talk to someone who was actually working on that project, because we did that, we learned about that as a case study of like the some of the pinnacle of like good urban design,
Yeah.
when I was in school, which is cool.
and
Cool.
and it was a huge education for me because we had world class architects,
Hmm.
and we traveled to Boston, New York, and other cities to see what were they doing right, what were they doing wrong. I
Hmm.
mean, I walked through New York with my head up in the air all the time to see what the cornice lines of the buildings were.
Hmm.
It's stuff that people normally don't pay attention to, and it was a great education. And then I later left that and got involved with mergers and acquisitions, set up my own investment bank.
You
Uh,
set up your own. I thought you were. I didn't realize you set up your own investment
Sure. Yeah,
bank.
Lloyd and Company.
Oh
And then
wow.
I partnered with another fellow named Herb Wax, and Wax Lloyd and Company. And then we also advised venture capital firms and had a regular series of venture capital meetings in San Francisco, looking at the condition of the investing environment. Taught finance as a professor at the University of Washington, and at age 55, um, I probably should have been looking back at what a great career I'd had, but it didn't seem that fulfilling when I was sitting by my mom's bed and she
Yeah.
was dying. And she'd been everything, and she'd actually helped me through some very hard physical ailments when I was very, very young. And there's nothing I could do. And I felt as though the medical establishment wasn't really helping much at all. They were just sort of helping the time until you die. And so I threw that all away. I said, thank God I had a loving wife and kids that understood. So we sold our waterfront home. We sold the investment bank, sold our real estate portfolio, started a biotech company, gave up my professorship at the University of Washington, and began slogging through a new perspective on human health.
Now, is it true that before you actually started this company, was it before or after? I don't know, but you like were you going to go to medical school?
Yes,
Was that and you were admitted or
I was admitted to Georgetown. Yeah, I had great recommendations, and I just decided that that was not going to be for
that was not
me.
it? Okay,
Yeah.
and then you started the bio tech
Well, yeah. Well,
company.
then I knew enough chemistry.
Hmm.
I knew enough of embryology. I knew enough about human health functions to have it make sense. But I hadn't spent the initial part of my career working in a lab
Mm.
with one particular perspective. All of that was
Hmm.
behind me. I could almost look at it as a child
Hmm.
stepping into a new view
Hmm.
of human health. Um, but I just had enough grounding, so it made sense. But I didn't have the commitment to do it the way that everybody else did.
Yeah. So, I mean, well, going back to the topic of innovative design
Right.
process,
Yes.
which is what my thesis was in, where I had studied dozens of geniuses that all did something that changed the world in some
Yeah.
way, right? But I didn't really care what it was that they
Mm-hmm.
did that
Mm-hmm.
changed the world. I studied the design process that led up to the
Right.
genius conclusion. And as I was going through this, I found that the pattern, it was a pattern that kept repeating. Like they were all doing the same process and all the same elements together. And hearing your story in the background, I mean, you're definitely a polymath, you know, a Renaissance man, you know, where you have all these different categories. This table is kind of checkered. So, you know, like if
Mm-hmm.
each is an industry, you know, you're studying and exploring and learning within that industry. I think of them as like pyramids, whereas, at the base, you know, they're all connected on a grid by language,
Mm-hmm.
um, and then as you kind of go up the pyramid, you get closer and closer to the center, further from the edges that are connecting to other industries.
You're very specialized when you're up here.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
once you get to the pinnacle, that's like the cutting edge, as
Yeah.
one would say, right, of the research in that industry. But the thing is that as you get closer and closer to the top, in terms of your depth of knowledge within that thing, you get farther and farther away from the other peaks of
Yeah.
other industries, right? And so the cross collaborative potential as you get higher to the top becomes more and more difficult, or at
Right.
least it has to be more intentional. And one of the things that geniuses do is they'll study one category, work their
Mm-hmm.
way up to maybe not all the way to the top, but they'll go up far enough, and then they'll go back down and go to another thing, work their way up. Okay, I understand that. Go to another one, work their way up, and people are looking and are like, if you look at the desk of someone like this, you'd be like, they're mad. You know, like they're absolutely
Yes.
crazy. They're lazy. They're quitters. They're like not gonna. They never finish anything. Like what are they even doing? You know, they just do the thing and then do it well. But what they're really doing is they're setting up this grid,
Mm-hmm.
and then they start building bridges of relationships between these peaks of elements, so that way they can very easily laterally shift from one category to the other. And the reason for this is that it gives them a different perspective of the problem that is at the pinnacle of
Right.
that industry. So the problem that everyone is trying to solve to get that pyramid to go up higher and higher and higher. Usually, you know, they hit a wall, and the industry's like, how do we solve this? How do we solve this?
Yeah.
But they're all looking at it from the same perspective. And so what geniuses do, it's not like, yes, they're intelligent, but it's not strictly attributed
IQ. Yeah.
to IQ. It's I would say it's mostly about iteration and perspective. So
Yeah.
they take a lot of different stabs at the problem from many different angles, and the way that they're able to bring different perspectives to the table is that they are bringing perspectives that have been explored through other industries
Yeah.
or other categories, and then they say, oh well, they solved a problem that looks very similar, and then they take that pattern and they apply it, and then you get this revolution that takes place. And so to hear how you've had effectively 5 lives, it seems, you know, and now you're like, oh, let me explore health, and I'm going to take with me, you know, some might call it baggage, I'm going to take with me this information that, you know, from these different categories. I'm going to go into a new category. The newness is actually really important to have
Mm-hmm.
that naivete. Uh, when you're approaching a new problem, because the naivete is actually a deconstruction of definition
Right.
that allows you to rebuild fresh definitions, which takes longer, it's more arduous, and it's not the fastest way to make it to the top. But your goal is not to make it to the top.
That's
Your
right.
goal is to get a different perspective
Yes.
of the problem.
And occupy that space between the two pyramids,
Mm-hmm.
because that's where discovery is.
Yes, cross categorical.
Yep.
So like you're overlaying a new grid
Yep.
on top of the existing grid, and that new grid is created through language and definition that creates new perspective.
And lots of patents lie there, right there.
Mm-hmm.
And explaining the patent to the patent um, clerk is not always easy, because oftentimes they'll say, that's not possible.
Well, not from
Yeah.
within, not from within that
Not from within
category,
that
and not
category.
from within any other individual
That's right.
category. But when you start building those bridges and you live cross-categorical, then
Then all of a sudden, yeah,
things,
that's where the discovery is.
because
Yeah.
reality is a spectrum. It's not a grid. It's
That's right.
not red, orange, yellow. Like we have created those boundaries between the colors, right, on
Hmm.
this spectrum that is a continuum. And though that benefits us because it allows us to quickly recognize elements in our environment, like, oh, that's a
Hmm.
chair.
Hmm.
Though I've
Hmm.
never seen that chair before,
Yeah,
I
but
know
it's
it's a
not a
chair.
threat, so I can accept it. Yeah.
Exactly. So there's benefits to it. But at the end of the day, if we're trying to create new discoveries, we need to approach subjects like a child, kind of like
Yes.
what you were saying,
Right on.
where there's very little language, very little definition, and a lot of time spent. I mean, this is why children spend so much time in play,
Hmm.
why they're so curious and why they explore so much. It's because they don't have the same patterns that we have developed as adults in certain areas. And so that exploration, you'll often see a child, like I saw an example at a place called Armature Works in Tampa,
Hmm.
and they had this table that was made up of like a car engine or something. And I walked by it real quick, and I was like, "Oh, the table," and it had like a decoration on top. But you could see that there were some adults standing next to the table, and they didn't give the table a second mind. And they had a little kid, 2 years old or so, and the kid was like looking at this table. He was like, whoa, what is this?
Yeah.
And then he saw this gear and he started turning this gear. And then there's like a lever under there. And then he's like exploring this table and really like experiencing that. And so the question is like, who understood that table more? Was it the adults standing there who weren't
Yeah.
paying it a second mind and they set their glass on it and they're like, this is good for putting a glass on? Or the kid who's like, there's so much potential
Yeah.
right here with this table, but he was like underneath the surface of it.
Yeah. And that's one of the reasons why Galahad has adopted one of its primary values, curiosity.
Mm-hmm.
You there's no dumb question. It's just curiosity and let's explore and let's make it fun. So that's the perspective that we have, and we've adopted that at Galahad. And along that same line, I'm really pleased that my daughter is also part of that
Mm-hmm.
exploration.
Considering these pyramids
Mm-hmm.
of knowledge base, um, can you think of any examples of how you have potentially uh, created bridges? Like, how has your law degree or your chemistry background or your,
Mm-hmm.
how have these other elements and these experiences in your life, how have they helped you to gain new perspective of this current endeavor that you're working on?
Yeah, I think that the my focus in organic chemistry, because it truly felt like a life and death moment when I
Mm-hmm.
was studying, I remembered very vividly keeping track of my electrons and imagining I was the nucleus
Mm-hmm.
and out there were all the electrons and I was keeping track of them because it meant how my other pieces would fold and relate to each other and how they would connect with other molecules and things of that sort. So I had a very keen understanding of electrons from a mass
Mm-hmm.
characteristic. And then later studies worked in an area of quantum mechanics
Okay.
and began to see and understand electrons not just as physical things, but also as an energetic thing, if you
Mm-hmm.
would, and that they sometimes were the same and sometimes they weren't. That in fact, this electron needn't always pass from point A to point B to have an effect, that its presence affected everything around it. And it was kind of, in part, a metaphysical leap that combined physics and chemistry. And then when I saw a Ironman competitor take that product take NION, and immediately see the impact.
Mm-hmm.
I realized, my God, it's the electrons that are doing this. It's not a chemical reaction.
Good
It's
point.
almost a quantum
Mm-hmm.
reaction, very similar to the bird
Yes.
who needed to go somewhere, and the quantum impact on the protein in its eye was helping direct it. Those are insights that well, also developed a couple of patents around.
That's right. Yeah. Can you talk about the patents? I think this is more recent, right?
Yeah, well, a couple of things. One is that the ability to carry this charge and have it affect our mitochondria, that's patentable in several ways. But in addition to that, there's a polyphenols or flavonoids in most cases. Those are the parts of fruits and vegetables that give it color. They have very strong positive effects on human physiology. The weakness is that they do not get absorbed at all or very little.
Okay.
So you have to take large amounts of facetin and other things like that to have an impact. So we've been experimenting now with combining these flavonoids with NION to actually create some new compositions that would bring the structured water and the flavonoid into the body much more efficiently, so that we'll be able to take advantage of some of these biological effects of flavonoids on the cell and be able to do it in a very cost-effective way. So there's just a whole range of activities where you see this connection between quantum, this connection between physical, and this connection with biological to pull them together into new perspectives that then you can take to the patent clerk and talk about.
That's amazing. Congratulations on
Yeah,
that.
thank
Um,
you.
is there anything that we haven't touched on regarding the research that you guys have done? Any other stories that maybe or anecdotal, or studies, that were
Mm-hmm.
done? Maybe we can. I know we've talked about broadly about some of the studies that were done, double-blind placebo, and how it increased VO2 max, but there were multiple studies, right? Were there
Right.
some other things that we could talk about in terms of like the evidence of the impact that this has?
Well, it's somewhat. Some of the stories are very similar to yours.
Hmm.
There was one athlete that uh, she had very serious problems. Well, let me explain her sport.
Sure.
It was an endurance trial where they would bring four people to a point, and that the four people had to work together to go down a river, scale a mountain, several days,
Oh,
and they cannot be farther than 10 feet apart.
okay.
And so they have to work as a team, and they have to push themselves really hard in these competitive races. And she was a firefighter, physically fit, and it was a male female team. And when she was completing these events, she was so depleted that her enzymes were just in terrible shape. So she started taking NION, and it bounced back very, very quickly.
Hmm.
And in fact, it bounced back so quickly that when she was working out, she couldn't believe the results, like you were
Yeah.
seeing on your aura. That she didn't realize that as she had climbed the stairs for the 53rd time, that her her pace was improving as opposed to being worse.
Hmm.
So there's just anecdote after anecdote after anecdote like this that we'll see, uh, principally as a person is getting older, the effects are stronger because, frankly, the mitochondria have deteriorated.
Hmm.
That it takes so much time and effort and energy to actually reproduce the mitochondria. There's 100 quadrillion mitochondria in our body. There's only 37 trillion cells in our body. There's thousands more times mitochondria. And they only have a life expectancy of 100 days.
Oh, wow.
What that means is there are literally billions of mitochondria being replaced every second in your body. You have no idea the amount of activity that's going on inside your body that is being affected by the electrical level and the structured water level in our body. So we're just beginning to crack open this understanding of mitochondria and the ability of it to reproduce and maintain our energy levels and extend our life expectancy. Now, I'm not going to be the first guy to reach 200, I know. But it certainly is going to be possible. No question in my mind about it.
Well, I don't have any problem with the idea, and I think probably most people who accept the Bible as truth would agree that the natural state of human beings is eternal, and then like in the Garden of Eden, right? That's the original design, and then after the fall of man, now it's like there's some kind of, we are in a different environment that now is degrading on our system in a way that it wasn't back in the garden somehow. And so that environmental context has changed. And so now we start to age. But even then, even with the environmental change that took place, the original human beings were living to be 900, 800, 600, 700. And it starts to diminish over time. You see, if you look at the timeline of ages, right? It's like it starts out close to 1,000 and then it just kind of starts to go down. And then you have the flood, and then it dramatically drops after the flood. As a matter of fact, I think that's the point where actually, this is an interesting point now that I think about it. What's your opinion on the scripture? I believe there's some scripture that says that there's a cap on life after the flood, and I believe it's 120 years. It's
that. I'm not an author or an authority on the scriptures.
Sure.
So I'm not going to opine about the scriptures and that business. Although I do believe they hold truths that not only have been revealed but are to be reaffirmed over time. And as we age, as we live longer, I think more and more will be revealed. I think we're going to understand human consciousness and its relation to the divine in ways that are difficult for us to comprehend now. Just as when you turned like a certain age and you saw yourself as an adult, we're going to find ourselves with our age becoming much more conscious and much more closely related to the divine. And then what is possible in terms of our ultimate age, I think it's really an open question.
But it definitely makes sense that the human body has the genetic potential to, well, we do it now. We repair cells. This is my second set of teeth. The reason why I can't grow anymore after this is odd. It's like, why, if I lost a tooth, why can't I grow another one now? We grow fingernails. They say that the cells in the body regenerate over a certain period of time. I think I've heard that the spine is the longest at 7 years before you have basically entirely new cells from the ones that were 7 years before. So in a way, it's like every 7 years, I am a different copy of myself.
Yes.
And so the idea that why can't, you extrapolate that, you're like, well, there is a makeup here, and there's something that is kind of stopping that or diminishing that ability over time. So it makes perfect sense.
Well, and that's really where a lot of the regenerative medicine is going, where they will pull out a healthy cell, turn it back into a stem cell, and then stimulate it in a way to become a new type of cell so
Hmm.
that they can give you, sort of regenerative capability. I think the curiosity is that the stem cell basically has no charge to it. And then when you stimulate it, you give it a charge. It's almost like the charge of life or some sort,
Hmm.
and that charge begins to direct its future maturation into the type of cell it becomes. So I think this electrical component is really an important part of who we are and what our cells become.
Hmm.
And sorting that out is we're just beginning. We're
Have
just
you
beginning.
have you done, so you mentioned that you're doing some work in consciousness research,
Right.
which is fascinating. I think that consciousness research is going to be the next revolutionary science that takes us into this next age of understanding
Zach,
the
I couldn't
reality.
agree with you more. I think you're absolutely spot on about
Hmm.
that. And there's a group, actually, my wife introduced me to Wisdom University and Ubiquity, which I mentioned before that we go to Chartres every year
Hmm.
to study ancient wisdom, or at least the seven liberal arts of the 10th century, and visit the cathedral and experience the divine in that
Hmm.
cathedral. And this group, they're spending much of their effort, their time, focusing on consciousness and what is being discovered in that field. It's just This is a wonderful time to be alive, honestly.
The fact that you're working in the field of charge and structuring water in the body, but also kind of exploring this topic of consciousness, I think there would be a very interesting. I think it would be a very interesting study to connect the two
Mm-hmm.
on structuring water and consciousness, because I think about this and I'm like, oh, it gives me a whole new perspective of what it means to pray over my food.
Mm-hmm.
It gives me
Mm-hmm.
a whole
It
new
does, doesn't it?
oh
Yes.
yeah, it gives me a whole new perspective of what it means to love my children or my wife, or
Mm-hmm.
to be like positively and lovingly connected in a conscious way, like with my attention, my full presence,
Right.
focusing that toward the people in my life. And
And here you
or
have this pyramid, and you're beginning to connect those into something that's really very, very powerful.
Yeah, yeah. So one of the things that comes to mind on that topic specifically, which I'm curious if you've thought about this at all yet. But I think of blue zones, how we have areas in the world where people
Sure.
they live to be 100, and that's somewhat common in a scenario.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And what I do understand is that there's not a whole lot in common about how
Right.
these people live. It's like,
Yeah.
is it the food? No. Is it like how much they smoke? No. Is it like
Yeah.
the water? Not really. Is it what is it? And one thing that they find in common
Mm-hmm.
across all of those is that they have very strong communities.
Ah.
And I think
Yeah.
that the strong communities, this to me, it's like, well, of course, God Himself is community, and God
Mm-hmm.
created this
Mm-hmm.
world in
Mm-hmm.
relationship. Like relationship is the fundamental weave,
Yeah.
the pattern that brings everything together. And if that's the case, I happen to, at this stage, my opinion could develop. But at this stage, I think that if consciousness is the fundamental fabric of reality, and the physical world is sort of a shadow of that,
Mm-hmm.
then our consciousness has to be a derivative of the source of
Right.
consciousness, which would be
Yes.
God's, and
Mm-hmm.
therefore, your consciousness and my consciousness would be fractions,
Of the
like
whole.
of the
Yep.
whole.
Yeah.
And it makes sense to me that the coming of the kingdom on earth the reason why love is at the core of this, the
Mm-hmm.
reason why relationships are at the core of this, the reason why we have to treat our brothers as ourselves,
Mm-hmm.
is because all these things bring us together, and it brings our consciousness together. And that assembling, it's like a puzzle piece. It's like
Yeah.
God took himself and turned it into a puzzle piece, scattered it on the table, and said, okay, guys, you all
Yeah.
have to find each other.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like we're reassembling this thing that, as it assembles, it's like bringing the kingdom of heaven down on earth in reality. And if that's the case, then it makes sense why community is so important, and
Mm-hmm.
why relationships are so important. And if that is the connecting force between all these blue zones and how people are living longer,
Mm.
then I can't help but wonder if it's like, well, there's just more love, and there's more attention, and there's more time spent between people. And
Mm-hmm.
that consciousness, that conscious effort of connecting, is actually doing real physical work in
Yes.
the body.
Yeah.
Now that is a wild, I don't think I've heard anyone say that. Maybe people have said that. I don't know, but that is a wild assumption. But I don't know. This is just me being naive and not knowing anything, and just coming to the table saying, I don't know. I'm seeing the dots here.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I do think you're onto something. I do think that the community is a necessary element for sure. And this is a bigger project than we can truly comprehend now. And maybe it's little steps that we take help the ultimate progress. But I think it's a huge undertaking
Yeah.
still.
Well, that's the mission
All
I'm on.
before it.
Is to
Yeah.
build sustainable communities. That,
There you go.
and it's not my mission. I definitely believe it's God's mission. But I felt like 12 years ago He invited me into
Mm-hmm.
that mission,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
there's been a few parts of it, to that mission. Like I remember my first day in architecture school.
Mm.
Um, I was sitting there listening to the professor speak,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm looking around class, and everyone's there just like drooling on their desk, and like not paying attention, looking at their phone or whatever it is. Um, and I have a moment in that class where I just feel like God speaks to me, and He
Mm.
says, it's almost like it was part visual, part auditory. It's hard to
Mm-hmm.
explain, but
Mm-hmm.
it was like He held out His hand in front of me, and He showed me a mission that He's working on,
Mm.
which was to develop small, sustainable communities around the world.
Mm-hmm.
And He like invited me. He said, "Would you like to help me do this?"
Oh.
And I didn't, you know, I didn't understand what He meant by that word. This is 12 years ago. So I didn't
Mm-hmm.
really know what small sustainable communities was. I'm thinking like little mud huts in the middle of
No.
like third world countries. And so my first response to Him was yes. I don't know what you're asking of me, but yes, whatever it
Mm-hmm.
is,
Mm-hmm.
I'm game. Let's do it. Um, and then my second question to Him was, well, why am I sitting here in architecture school? Why am I going to get my master's degree? I have a long journey ahead.
Mm-hmm.
I could just quit right now, hop on a train, with some missionary group, and go start drilling wells and building, little structures, and there we go.
Yeah.
Simple. I
Yeah.
don't need
Yeah.
a degree. Like, this is for people who want to do like skyscrapers and hospitals and airports and cities and like the big stuff. There's like a lot of work ahead here.
Mm-hmm.
And he reassured me. He was like, Zach, you are exactly where you need to be. Just remember the mission as you go through this. I said, okay. And so I continued. I continued the rest of my degree with that mission in mind. But I never really asked until recently, like just about this past year, because it's been an uphill. I feel like I've been pushing a boulder uphill, this whole time. And I just asked recently. I said, why do you want to build small sustainable
Mm.
communities all around the world?
Yeah.
I never really asked that question. I know it seems dumb.
Sure.
Like,
No.
you're doing all this work for a decade and you don't even ask why. Like, no, he asked me to. I was like, that's why because I felt like God asked me to do this. And he told me, he said, my people need to live in community. They need community.
Mm-hmm.
And right now they have a counterfeit for community There's this like counterfeit, there's this surrogate
Yeah.
for community. And so I'm calling my people out of the world into community with others that I'm calling out of the world. And the whole purpose of this is to for the edification of the body, to reorient my people back toward God. And he said that is going to increase faith, increase steadfastness, and it's going to allow them to endure and for what is to come, whatever that is. I don't know, but
return us to who we are, and our connection with the divine.
So I think it's all connected.
Yeah,
I guess is what
absolutely
I'm
agree.
saying.
Absolutely agree. Absolutely agree. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Zach, you're very clearly on a mission. I always thought it was presumptuous of Galahad to say, "I'll accept immortality on one condition." So it's not at all unusual for you to ask, those questions over and over and over again, because I'm sure that the answers will come to you too.
Little by little, it's as though he's given me. It's what it feels like. It feels like he spoke to me once, and that singular message was so full of meaning and of understanding that I couldn't quite parse it all out the first time that I understood it. And I feel like I've been hearing echoes of it reverberate throughout the decades. And it's been like, oh, that's what that means. Oh, that's the reflection of the thing that you said. Oh, and it's just been slowly unraveling and unpacking over time, and
as a discovery. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And a big part of that was understanding that I have to be in relationship with him as I'm moving forward in this mission, and not just take the mission and run with it.
Yeah. Yeah. So and then seeing how so much of it is interrelated, so you can build these pieces of understanding and connect them in ways that allow people to see something new.
What have you learned so far about negative charge and in your explorations in NION and how it affects the body, from all that you've learned so far on that topic and charge specifically? Is there anything that comes to mind in the built environment on how it might translate into like your home? Maybe you've already made a change in your home based on your understanding of how charge in the body work.
Well, one of the concepts that I think that you embrace is that our planet Earth is a built environment, if you would.
Yeah.
and relating to it is really important, as and recognizing that it is, as a whole, has life to it. It has a charge. Does it have intention? It almost feels like it does. And that being able to connect with Gaia, if you would, this living earth that we are part of, is really an important element of it. That is, the first home we bought was built on top of a swale. Okay. No wonder we had running water under our foundation.
Oh, yeah.
Being in touch with what is really going on with that living piece of earth is fundamental, I think. And so it probably changes from place to place a great deal. And that, so for example, in the Northwest, water is like, it's there, it's everywhere. And having it worked into your environment, your home, that's perfect.
Yeah. So an architecture that orients you back toward the earth.
Yes.
And that's, you had asked me a bit ago what my design philosophy is
Mm-hmm.
in architecture, and it's very much that. So if I could elaborate a little bit on that,
Mm-hmm.
it's um, I think that architecture is an interface between us and the earth.
Mm-hmm.
I think that is an interface between us and other people. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that architecture is an interface between us and God.
Mm-hmm.
The interface sits between these elements, you know. You can imagine that if you take the architect, or if you take the interface away out of the equation, then you have these very rough connections
Right.
between like us and the earth, for example. And
Mm-hmm.
that's not exactly the best thing, maybe. It's hard for me to know, but there's definitely TV shows that show where they drop people out in the middle of nowhere with
Oh.
no architectural intervention, right?
Uh-huh.
Like maybe the clothes on their back, maybe not. Um, and then you see like, oh, how long will they survive? And that's really the question, not like you're not even asking if they're going to be healthy. It's like, will they die?
Mm-hmm.
You know, like so you know, there's extremes to this, but even something as simple as building a tool to hunt with, that is an architectural intervention, or building a little shed to like sleep in so that we can get out of the elements. That
Mm-hmm.
is an
Mm-hmm.
architectural intervention.
Mm-hmm.
And what those things do is they help you to interface, to connect with the earth in a more profound way, or
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
in a more diverse way. Where I think we've gone wrong in architecture, specifically in relationship to the earth, is that we have forgotten that it is meant to allow us to connect to the earth in a more profound way.
Right.
And today, the architecture is all about disconnecting us from the earth. We do not want the outdoor air.
Oh,
We do
excellent.
not want the outdoor light in our modern
Right.
architecture.
Right.
We do not want the outdoor charge of the earth in our architecture. We do not want, I mean, we can go on. Like, there's so many ways that we've created this boundary that separates us from the earth. And I would say that the same goes with the other two, like it separates us from other people, because I think
Right.
architecture nowadays, you look at a typical suburb and it's oriented toward the street. It's not oriented, the buildings are not oriented toward
Right.
each other.
Right.
There is no capacity for my children to just walk out the front door and I know that they're going to be okay. People
Mm-hmm.
don't do that
They
anymore
don't.
with their kids. And there's a good reason. It's because the architecture is very dangerous. The way that it's been
Mm-hmm.
set up, I
Mm-hmm.
don't know anyone in my community anymore. It's a dangerous world. Why? Well, it didn't used to be, but I would say that the architecture has been, that the environment has set things up to where we cannot know each other anymore.
Yeah.
We cannot interface with the earth anymore. We don't know the earth anymore. We don't know the other people anymore. And then we don't have to get into the third part, which is the intervention, the interface with God. But I mean, there's so many examples of this with like the tabernacle, the temple. We have, you know, churches. We have sacred spaces. We have Soul Duck Falls, the spiritual. You know,
Mm-hmm.
you have monuments that, you know, megalithic structures. You have. I mean, there is very much an architecture that interfaces with this spiritual reality that we live in.
Right.
And so, architecture, I think, is an incredibly important puzzle piece
Right.
to understand in terms of our oneness with creation, which I think is the same thing as saying health.
I
Like,
think you're right.
yeah.
Yes. And when we were looking at the large scale project in Seattle, there were elements of that as well. That, for example, the uh, the thinking around Jane Jacobs' life of a city, so that people would relate to one another comfortably
Hmm.
within the urban environment, was a big driver to some of the design considerations. And it even came to the point where there were going to be two towers uh, adjacent to each other over this major staircase that was connecting the heart of the city with the soul of the city, the
Hmm.
waterfront with the business part. and we are seeing the space in between as being a place for people to live. So they could celebrate on the waterfront, they could work in the office. And these two towers, the debate was, is this going to be a place where we can hang symbols, shared symbols, between the two towers over this staircase that would go? I mean, these are the kind of conversations that I found really to be very moving and necessary. And then dollars and cents raises its the issue, and how much can you actually accomplish in this time? So that, and then also human beings sometimes think less of themselves. Oh, wouldn't it be ostentatious to have two towers adjacent to each other? You know, it's so you have to ask these questions all the time and debate them, and create a better space for us to live in and have community in. I wish that we'd had the two towers and that we could hang our celebratory flags or events over them, whether it's the international soccer tournaments or the U.S. flag or whatever, to celebrate this community that we've got. And so I think architecture is key to that, and understanding the relationship of architecture to the people and the place and what's going to go on there. But we're human, and so we're not perfect. We don't always come up with a perfect solution.
I've explored this topic with in some other discussions that I've had on this podcast, but it comes up again, in my mind right now in terms of charge and the house and in human health. And I can't help but think that having grounded floors in the home, like electrically grounded floors, so that way when we're walking around barefoot at home, that would help our body to constantly discharge the positive buildup of electrons, or not electrons, but positive buildup of protons, I guess, in the body, which, first it's like, well, you want to try to protect yourself from absorbing that, which comes, I don't know, I'm not an expert on this, but I imagine that that's where devices in my computer and the Wi-Fi maybe, and, I don't know, there's EMF considerations. I'm not an EMF expert or anything, but that I imagine are some sources of those elements. But I think that we could approach this in two ways. One could be try to mitigate that exposure, but the other is like, well, if you're grounded, I mean, maybe that's not actually going to have as much of a negative effect on your health, because it's more or less just passing through you, not collecting and wreaking havoc,
Well,
within you.
I think Jerry Pollack expressed it really well when he said that there's a huge source of these positive ions that we don't recognize, and that's coming from our universe. Gamma radiation is a huge source, and 95% or 97% of the gamma radiation is a positive ion that we're being bombarded with all the time. So we do need to find ways to dissipate that, as well as the natural buildup, whether it's from food or other habits that we have. So you're right. I think that we do need to have grounding opportunities so that we can discharge the positive that builds up, have the negative enter our bodies, and recharge everything from the mitochondria to the cell membranes on and on. So we're able to maintain a healthy physical being. And it just will help our thinking processes too if we're healthy.
Yeah, I agree. And then the only other element that comes to mind is lighting in the home, because if the sun helps to structure water in the body, and that's such an important part of health, then, I was talking to Jonathan Drecke about this a little bit more where full spectrum sunlight is actually pretty unique
Yes.
in how it interfaces with the body. And when you take segments of any of those spectrum, when you take a segment of the full spectrum of light and you expose it to
Yeah.
cells, it starts to the structure of the cell starts to collapse. And I imagine it
Mm-hmm.
affects the mitochondria as well. And so getting full spectrum light in the house, I think honestly, incorporating more UV as a part of that full spectrum in the home would very likely, if not definitely, mitigate mold issues inside the home
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
because
Mm-hmm.
it's a cleaning type of an energy that I think violet light actually in the visible spectrum will do this as well. Um,
Well, the ultraviolet light is an area that we're beginning to do some exploration
okay.
with, and it's a bit troubling because it's also used as a disinfectant,
Hmm.
and it can cause damage to skin and
Hmm.
eyes and all that business. So, as much as we want to explore, we don't want to do it foolishly.
Yes.
And so that's why we spent 25 years developing all of the safety protocols around NION
Hmm.
so that we're able to say with a great deal of confidence that, gee, this is safe and it really does offer important health benefits. And you're right, the full spectrum light is an area for us to really understand more fully. And unfortunately, the UV side is really much more complex
I
than
agree.
the infrared side.
I completely agree, and I do wonder if introducing UV as a light, like an artificial light source, I would not do that
Good. Okay.
because um, it's it would in my mind it would have to be just it would have to be sunlight, and so
Yeah.
like I would not artificially introduce um, UV, but I would consider doing something like quartz glass that
Oh,
is
interesting.
structured. It's
Yeah.
different than soda
Yeah.
lime
Yeah.
glass,
Yeah. Yeah.
and they
Yeah.
use it in laboratories. I'm
Mm-hmm.
sure you
Mm-hmm.
may have even dealt with some
Yeah.
of it when you're dealing with spectrometers and things like that. You would have like a quartz glass plate because it allows the full spectrum light to pass through it.
Right.
Now, if you did that in an area that, like a room that is very important to have UV, because UV helps with hormone production of like
Yep.
cortisol spikes and vitamin D production,
Yep.
which are very important, particularly in the morning, to help get
Mm-hmm.
your
Mm-hmm.
systems
Yeah.
awake, then in my mind, I would consider quartz glass on the east facing wall of like the bedrooms,
Oh, interesting.
right? So that way, as the
Interesting.
sun is rising,
Yeah.
the light wakes you up. You're getting the hormone spikes in your body because you're getting the signaling
Mm-hmm.
from the environment around you, um, and then maybe there's an adjacent outdoor morning patio or something. So if you want to go outside specifically, but you wouldn't necessarily have to, in theory. Um, but I think that there's also something to the sound, like morning bird song. There's been I've seen some information about how morning bird song opens up the stomata on the leaves of plants to allow them to
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
photosynthesize.
Yeah.
So things like plants interfacing with birds and the sound at the time of the sunrise. It's like all this is connected, and I can't help but think like there's things that we don't know about ourselves.
Yeah. Well, there was something I wanted to ask you about that
Yeah.
because I try to practice my Tai Chi in the morning,
Okay.
and my office faces east.
Excellent.
And so I like to do it as the sun rises over the Cascade Mountains.
Oh wow.
And it just, when it's just starting to peak over, that's when I'll start the practice. And by the time my practice is over, the full sun is, out there. But I'm looking at it through my window. I'm not in outdoors.
Mhm.
Uh, and it's just sort of a habit I got into because I like it.
Yeah.
Haven't thought about it much until you just mentioned it right now. The kind of the rhythm and the full spectrum light and the morning.
Hmm.
Is it far better to be outdoors? Can you get it through the light
Well,
in
the
the window?
typical soda lime glass, especially if you have high efficiency glass,
Mm-hmm.
right? That's very highly insulated.
Yeah.
It tends to reflect the upper end of the spectrum,
Oh,
and
okay.
you're letting in. visible light and infrared light.
Okay.
So you're still getting infrared, you're still getting visible, but you're not getting full spectrum
I
because
see. Okay.
it's reflecting the shorter wavelength of UV. And
Okay.
so if you were to have quartz glass or something like that, then that would let in the full spectrum. Now, the upper portion of that spectrum, to my understanding, that is what signals to the body through
There
the
you go.
eyes, through
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
skin,
Yeah.
that signals to the brain, hey, it's morning time, release these hormones, wake this person up, like let's get the systems rolling. Whereas if you're looking through soda lime glass, my understanding is it could take hours for that signal to finally like
Really?
click in, even though
Yes.
it's bright and you're looking, you're like, it's bright out there, but because it's through glass and you're missing that upper UV segment, whereas maybe it only takes 15 minutes if you walk outside. Um, Now, if it's cold, then I would say probably still walk outside,
Okay.
because I've even heard some things where they're like, yeah, vitamin D synthesis, though you have to be below a certain, uh, latitude, or I always get these
Yeah.
wrong. You have to be below a certain latitude in order to have vitamin D synthesis from the sun in the
Mm-hmm.
wintertime.
Yeah.
If you're above that, you aren't going to get vitamin D
Yeah.
synthesis from the sun, so you have to get it from other sources. Maybe it's raw milk, whatever. But I've heard something that I haven't looked into it too much yet, but I'm very it's perfectly aligned with everything else that I'm like, that makes sense. Um, it's that cold exposure during the wintertime when there's
Mm-hmm.
less sunlight, your body has an internal mechanism to create the hormones that you need
Oh.
that offset the requirement for sunlight in order to create vitamin D synthesis. And it's more aligned with the environment that you're in, where there's not as much fruits and vegetables. There's not as much like it all just works together.
Yeah.
So I think that going outside, regardless of how cold it is, might still be, like even if we do quartz glass, like
Yeah.
even if we ground the floors, even if we create artificial birdsong through your speakers in your house, or whatever, just the temperature difference alone, like we're still isolating you from that temperature difference in the environment, which is still another signal that our bodies have evolved to be connected with. And so it's like we kind of still need something like that.
Zach, I had a dream about the office building that we were going to build for Galahad. And it was a fairly standard office building, squarish, except at the very top, it had a pyramid. And the pyramid was facing, north, and it was um, but I think that when we get to the point of actually doing that, I'd like to have you get involved with that project.
I would love to. And as a matter of fact, it's funny that you say this about the pyramid above,
Mm-hmm.
because one of the people that I want to interview, he has a pretty incredible story. He builds pyramids
Oh.
um, from elements that have certain crystals or copper wound. I don't really understand
Mm-hmm.
much about
Mm-hmm.
it,
Mm-hmm.
but what he explains is that it creates a biofield, and they have done some experiments with plants
Yeah.
and other simple, more simple, less complex systems than like human body. But they've done some experience with biofields, and they're like, no, this creates like an energy field that if you go in it, like put your bed in a larger one of these or
Mm-hmm.
whatever, like it aligns the energy fields in a way that is very positive.
Yeah.
Um, and I would love to interview him and learn more about the work that he's doing, because I'm on a mission, right, not just to do the healthiest home in the world, but like I also want to. I have this idea for a greenhouse
Mm-hmm.
that involves structured water, that involves full spectrum sunlight, that
Mm-hmm.
involves maybe higher density carbon dioxide or a
Yeah.
slightly modified atmosphere. Um, and I would love to incorporate like some sort of biofield element like that. And so what you're talking about, I was thinking about, I was like, there's got to be a way that the architecture of a building can incorporate. Is it the geometry that's doing it? Is it the materials that's doing
Mm-hmm.
it? Like
Mm-hmm.
what is creating that energetic field? So your dream, it reminds me of that. And I haven't gotten too deep into that yet, but that's another thing that seems very interesting to explore. And I think that um, it reminds me of things like the pyramids and other
Yeah.
megalithic
Yeah.
structures where, personally, I think that those are probably more likely. They're structures that are designed to alter a state of consciousness. Um, And it makes me think of stories in the Bible, like with, is it Nimrod, and how he was trying to reach heaven, and they
Mm-hmm,
built these
mm-hmm,
towers to
mm-hmm,
reach heaven.
mm-hmm.
You know, when I read that story at first, I'm thinking like physically, like how many feet in the sky can we build it to reach heaven? But I'm like, well, no, heaven is not like
There.
up.
Yeah.
Heaven is like,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
consciousness. Like it's like another, it's like a deeper state, a more true fundamental state of consciousness. And I think of stories of like psychedelic explorations, or meditative explorations, or you just read in the scripture how they're like, oh, I was on the Sabbath day and I was in the spirit on the Sabbath day. It's like, okay, well, what is this? Like,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
and I think of, you know, this idea of like, well, if you were trying to force your way into heaven,
mm. Yes.
you know, we see these structures and nobody knows who built them, you know, but you're like, why? I can't help but, I don't know anything about it. But
That does take us full circle in some ways because we ask a question, uh, who or what is stealing this 120 years
mm-hmm,
that is ours? And I answered it, hubris
mm-hmm,
was part of it. And that's the same sort of thing that would imagine building a tower to get into heaven.
yeah,
Just that's hubris,
yeah,
and it's not the answer.
no,
And just because we have the wealth, just because we have the power, just because we have the technology, doesn't mean that it should be applied and used. And there are other elements like geometry. The pyramid, can have energetic power, and there is a sacredness to geometry
mm-hmm,
that I think is fundamental to architecture
mm-hmm,
too, that maybe you're keying into. The sacredness of geometry as manifest through architecture, I think, is an important element. But boy, that's a big field. That's a big field.
yeah. We'll take it one step at a time.
Okay.
Well, thank you so much, Steve, for taking the time to
Real
talk with me.
pleasure, Zach. Real
Yeah,
pleasure getting to know you and your team here. This beautiful town you live in too.
thank you, and thank you for the work that you're doing with all the projects that you're working on.
Very good.